Okay. Thank you. When Tom and Michelle and I met to assign chapters for this book, Michelle was originally going to do this chapter on holy orders, which, kind of made sense since she's a priest. But because of schedules, I was out of town last week, and so she switched with me. And I have to say that I gained so much from doing this chapter. I believe there was a reason the schedule worked out that way. I want to share a little story with you, and some of you have probably heard it, but I felt it really related to this section on hands. There was a little boy who was very frightened of thunderstorms. And every time a thunderstorm would come, he would run to his dad and want to be held and protected. And one night his dad said to him, it's okay because God will be with you through the thunderstorm. And he said, yeah, Dad, I know, but right now I need somebody with skin. I love that little story because I think it fits with this chapter. I heard it years and years ago from a Lutheran pastor in a sermon, so I'll give him credit, but I can't remember his name. I really could spend the whole morning just on this first section. The first chapter, touch. It's something we moved away from during COVID. I can't read my notes if I take them classes. And the impact for me has been very challenging because I was never a hugger in my early life. My family wasn't huggers. But then I married a hugger, married into a hugging family, and I was hurted. Talks about the power of touch in Jesus' ministry. He healed with the power of touch. And she talks about the power of touch in all of our lives. We know the research on babies who are raised in orphanages. We know the research on all kinds of power of touch. We learned during COVID about the impact of the lack of touch for the elderly in nursing homes because they weren't allowed to have visitors. The impact of COVID has touched all of our lives, and some of us are still uncomfortable with hugging and touching. And we all have to follow a path that's comfortable for us. But we must also remember the healing power of touch. So somebody asked me this morning if I wore my apron to make a coffee. I said no. I did not wear my apron to make a coffee. Somebody gave this years ago, and it's been in a drawer. I haven't to think of it this morning, but how appropriate for this morning. I also remember early in Father Remington's ministry here, his announcement in one Sunday morning that we were in a period of consensual hugging. In other words, we had to ask people before we hugged them. I hope we're moving out of that. In many denominations, including the Episcopal Church, the laying on of hands is used in baptism. But there are other instances too. And one that I'm very familiar with is one that we have done for years at the Women's Retreat. I guess I'm supposed to be staying on this earlier. At the Women's Retreat, at the end of the retreat, we usually gather around our speaker in gratitude and thanksgiving and lay hands on our speaker. And the laying on of hands extends, because we have 40 or 50 women there, extends all across the room. One hand on the next shoulder and eventually getting to the speaker with hands on. It's a very powerful experience. I also experienced it years ago in a Bible study I was in at a different church, where the laying on of hands was not uncommon in our small group. If someone was ill or had something going on in their lives that was just difficult, we would often, at the end of our Bible study, lay on hands and pray together. It was very powerful. So I guess this chapter about the laying on of hands and touch has really, really touched me. In the next section, she talks about the mission, the church start that they had. And she says, our greatest commonality was a desire to create a different sort of church in Dayton, namely by making it authentic, intentional, and missional. Slippery buzzwords we said we hated, but which we still invoked from time to time because they reflected our truest hopes and dreams. She spends a whole chapter on the mission, and it's the longest chapter or longest section in this chapter. And I think the length of that chapter really reflects the impact it had on her life and her disappointment, her true ultimate disappointment in the failure of that church. But she also talks about the powerful and loving relationships that were formed in that environment. And again, touch is mentioned repeatedly. Trust is also a major theme in this section. All of the members contributed financially and with their time and talents. All of them shared their deepest hopes for the mission, and yet it failed. She questioned why, what the reasons might have been that it failed. And yet she and Dan, her husband, treasured what they had gained from it and expressed their gratitude. Perhaps the lessons here are not in why it failed, but in the lasting relationships and the recovery, the resurrection. And she talks about that too in this section. The next section is called Epic Fail, which I thought was a really interesting title. And in this section, she talks a lot about pastors and ministers and priests or whatever titles they carry in various denominations and the challenges she faces. I don't know if her statistics are accurate when she says that 80% report being discouraged in their roles. I hope that's not true, but I personally know at least one minister who left the ministry for a time, eventually came back or went back on a part-time basis. He was a close friend and in fact the Lutheran minister who married us. We shared many conversations about why he left, and they were very revealing. She talks about the Epic Fail Conference. Maybe that's what small groups provide for us in our environment. The safety of a place to share our failures. I believe one of our responsibilities is to support our clergy in whatever way we can. And I've asked Mother Michelle if she will, I'm not asking her to share her failures. That would be a little too big. Not that she's had any, but what I've asked her to do is just give us 2 or 3 minutes of what helps her, what gets her through those discouraging times.
You guys switch and do this differently than we originally did. Hi, Sue. Hi, Patty. I'm just like you. I have the same discouragement that you experience and the same ups and downs spiritually of feeling dry and feeling like your prayers aren't being heard or being answered, and the same practices that you all experience as well. I would say that for me, things did shift significantly in my life when I became ordained, because I was used to sitting in the pew and being fed, and kneeling at the altar rail and being fed, and just reverse that and be the person that's feeding people. It's very different. There's a lot of loss in it. There's a lot of loss, and there's a lot of wonderful benefits of it too, like being set apart, have all week to work on a sermon. Not that I have all week. It's not like I don't do anything else during the week. I don't just work on Sundays, as some people think about clergy. Having that time to think about the scripture, meditate on it. I probably spend a good 20 hours on a sermon, reading the scriptures, reading commentaries, doing some study, praying about what the Holy Spirit wants you to hear. Sometimes I write a sermon and then I realize, oh, that was for me. That wasn't for you. And that goes in the pile, which Remington, if you haven't heard a sermon today yet, he said he wrote a sermon and then this morning God told him not to preach that one. So that happens a lot, not surprisingly. So the same practices that nourish you are probably some of the same for me. Although one big shift I noticed when I got ordained was I prayed so often out loud, leading liturgies. I kind of got sick of my prayers for a while, and I started doing centering prayer much more often, just having some silence and knowing that I'm in God's presence. That's a good reminder to me that I don't bring God with me. And so hopefully you all know that too. When we show up at the hospital or come and pray with you, we're not bringing God with us. God is with all of you. It's not just kind of overcoming some of those thought processes that we get tripped up thinking a lot about our clergy. I'm very clear that I'm not bringing God with me. I'm representing the church when I come to you or pray with you, and I'm a representative of God because you guys have set me apart to do that work in our community. So centering prayer has been one of the most important things for me to do as a priest, to just remember that I'm in God's presence always, that there's no place that I can go apart from it, and to not hear my own voice saying those prayers is really helpful. Any questions that you guys have for me that won't take up all of Janet's presentation time? Well, you know my number, you can call me.
Actually, Michelle's remarks kind of reminded me of the little story I started with, because you may not bring God, but when you come, we need somebody with skin. Thank you, Michelle. The last part of this is feet. And there's several quotes in your handouts. I'm not going to read those. But what occurred to me was body parts. She starts the section on holy orders with hands and ends with feet. I think feet represent the more humble of the two. Sometimes my feet hurt, literally and figuratively. I just get tired of going. But feet carry us, and when they don't, we have to find another way. I've never participated in the feet washing ceremony at church. No, I know you're shocked. But my reason is I can't stand for anybody to touch my feet. It's just a personal thing. I don't get pedicures. I don't do that stuff because I can't stand for anybody to touch my feet. But I've often thought that maybe I should be on the other end of that. Not as clergy, but I just think it's an interesting practice to maybe look at as lay people, because I think it's a very humble act. Rachel Held Evans says all Christians share the same calling. We are all royal priests. She goes on to say, to be called into the priesthood, as all of us are, is to be called to a life of presence and kindness. So that's kind of my take on this chapter. You have questions and some quotes. So I'm going to just move it to you all. Does anybody have any questions or comments before I do that?
There's still donuts, there's still coffee, we've got more coffee. Please help yourself.
Great, thank you.
Could you guys hear today?
Yes, I wasn't
Yes.
the last 2 weeks.
Better than
so,
last week.
But I like how you guys stand in front of
Yeah.
the computer
Yes,
and the
Yes.
minute you walk away from it, you loses it, but it was perfect just to be, we're like your spotters, so to speak.
yes, it was.
Yeah.
Very good.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Finally, it worked for once. Do you have the questions that were in the
Yes.
email?
Adam, I lost him.
You
Hold on.
finally got them printed, yes.
I got him. Hold on. I have to say, nothing thrills me more than a foot massage.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not joking. I've had a few and it's like, oh my God, why doesn't somebody give me this for a monthly thing for my birthday?
That would be great, yeah. it
Yeah,
was.
oh my God. It's just because all the anxiety goes there and they're just.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That's right.
I've only had 2 and I remember them both vividly, like, oh, don't be
Nothing
done.
like I know what you mean. It's-
There's a lot of reflex trigger points or something on your feet that.
Yeah.
There are.
I
Yes.
believe that to be true.
That's very
because
true.
The very
Yes.
first time I had one, it's like, oh my God, how did I go through life without having this? Anyway, it
It's
was,
wonderful, yeah, yeah.
so Janet needs that.
She should. And then she would, realize, I mean, she would enjoy it, I'm sure.
Get addicted.
Of
Yeah.
course.
I should buy myself that for Valentine's Day. Okay, let's see the
Why
question.
don't you? Yeah.
I'm gonna mute on my end, so
Okay,
you guys can have your conversation, okay?
Sure. Thank you.
thanks.
I'm gonna stop recording.
So holy